People of conscience around the world are continuing to mourn 4 Al Jazeera journalists killed by an Israeli strike in Gaza City. Anas al-Sharif, Mohammed Kreka, Ibrahim Zahir, and Mohammed Noufal were murdered alongside freelance journalists Muamman Aliwa and Mohammed al-Khaldi. The airstrike hit a press tent, drawing condemnation from the UN as a targeted attack on journalists. The UN described the killing as, quote, an attempt to silence reporting on the ongoing genocide and starvation campaign in the besieged enclave. The UN continued to say that the killing of 4 journalists, just as Israel announces its plans to take over Gaza City, is no coincidence, but a deliberate attempt to silence those who would have exposed the IDF's atrocities to the world. Anas al-Sharif was one of the most prominent reporters working in Gaza, having worked almost constantly for the duration of the 2-year war on the Strip. Mohammed Mawad, Al Jazeera's managing editor, described him as the only voice left in Gaza City. Earlier today, I spoke to Layla Al-Aryan, an executive producer at Al Jazeera. I began by asking her what the impact of Anas al-Sharif's killing has been on her colleagues at the broadcaster.
It's obviously been extremely devastating to learn about Anas al-Sharif's death and also the death of other colleagues, Mohammed Kreka, Ibrahim Zahir, Mohammed Noufal, Mu'min Alawa, and Mohammed Khalidi, who was a freelancer. It's important that we say their names and that we tell their stories because Palestinians at large, and more specifically Palestinian journalists, have been so dehumanized that we can witness Israel repeatedly make threats to their life and to murder and target the largest number of journalists killed in modern history, more than World War I, II, the Vietnam War, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. This has been the deadliest conflict for journalists in our modern history. And the lack of solidarity that we see has a direct result in the endangering of these journalists' lives and also the overall devaluing of Palestinian life. It's been extremely devastating. If Israel can get away with targeting and threatening and murdering the most prominent journalist in Gaza, Anas al-Sharif, what does that say about every other journalist? What does that say about children? Israel has killed the largest proportionally number of children in any conflict in history. Again, proportionally, the largest number of aid workers, of medical workers, of civilians, over 70% at least, are women, children, and the elderly. That tells you everything about how vulnerable every civilian is in Gaza. And this, of course, will have a chilling effect in terms of the coverage. It is no coincidence that Israel attacked the tent of the Al Jazeera journalists outside Al-Shifa hospital just as it announced that it was expanding its offensive in Gaza City, an offensive that's expected to be just as bloody and just as vicious and brutal as the rest of its assault on Gaza. Anas al-Sharif and his colleagues were the eyes and ears. They were the truth tellers. They told us both on air on Al Jazeera, but also in social media, what was happening to the Palestinian people every day. And without their voice and without their journalism, all of us are suffering as audience members, as fellow journalists, as people who are demanding a stop to this genocide.
There is something deeply unprecedented about this. Journalists typically are a protected category during times of war. What does it mean that Israel has violated this convention, and how has it been able to violate this convention in this way?
Well, let's be clear that this does not begin with this war on Gaza. Israel, as the Committee to Protect Journalists revealed in a 2023 report, has been attacking journalists with impunity for decades. In this very important report called Deadly Patterns, CPJ documented the killing of at least 20 journalists over a period of 22 years, showing that Israel has enjoyed impunity, that Israel has not investigated the killings of these journalists unless it had its back to the wall. Our colleague, Shireen Abu Akleh, an Al Jazeera correspondent in the West Bank, was killed in Jenin, and no one has been held accountable for that killing. You can say the same for the killing of every journalist prior to October 7th. No one is ever held accountable, and the world continues to give Israel impunity in its killing of journalists. Now, of course, since October 7th, Israel has killed upwards of 250 journalists, including a journalist by the name of Assam Abdullah in Lebanon, but also the vast majority being in Gaza, the deadliest place in the world by far for journalists. When the world stays silent, when the United States, which is Israel's strongest supporter and enabler of this genocide, allows this to continue with impunity and demanding nothing, all that will do is show the world that killing journalists has no consequence. And that puts every journalist at risk. Every country that decides to target journalists will believe that it will enjoy the impunity that Israel enjoys. That puts all of us at risk. And frankly, the silence of my peers in the media industry has been shameful. Anas al-Sharif himself was tweeting for months, hashtag protect Anas al-Sharif. What did we see in response? Silence, indifference, apathy, and in some cases, the media industry even carrying water for Israel, even after it admitted that it murdered and targeted Anas al-Sharif. What did we see? Despicable media coverage regurgitating some of the very fabricated claims that Israel has been making for months against Anas. And it's not just Anas, it's others.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about the way in which journalists around the world have dealt with what is happening in Gaza right now. Oftentimes, they will kind of hide behind these ideas of objectivity and neutrality. As a journalist yourself, how do you think about the concept of something like objectivity within a context like this, where one side has so much power and the other side has so little, at least institutionalized power?
When it comes to this issue, Palestinians are so dehumanized, and there's so much pressure in the Western media, the legacy media, to adopt the Israeli perspective that journalists simply forget how to do their jobs. The job of a journalist is to report a story out and follow the facts where they lead. Unfortunately, what we've seen for decades, not just since October 7th, but of course it's escalated since October 7th, is for the most part, the legacy media dropping any pretense of objectivity, of doing their jobs as journalists, of reporting stories out, and simply taking the Israeli line, propagating their talking points of the day. And we see that even when it comes to the killing of journalists, of their peers. We see a wholesale adaptation and regurgitation of Israeli propaganda without actually seeing, what is the source of their claims, reporting the claims out for themselves to see where they lead. Palestinians are not asking journalists to be on their side. They're not asking them to be biased. They're simply asking them to do their jobs and do them in a way that's professional and that's leads to the truth.
Are you concerned about how the truth is going to get out of Gaza now that literally an entire team of journalists, of reporters, one of the only functioning organizing teams of journalists in the Strip, have literally been killed?
This is a huge concern. Israel has announced its intention to continue forcibly displacing Palestinians from their homes all over Gaza, squeezing them into a smaller and smaller space. They haven't tried to hide their intentions, and they threatened these journalists for a long time. They've killed so many journalists in order to silence the truth and to silence the coverage. Anas al-Sharif's last live report on Al Jazeera was from a hospital, and his report was focused on the starvation of children. All of these crimes are still happening on a daily basis. An average of 100 Palestinians are being killed on a daily basis. These massacres of people waiting for food aid are happening on a daily basis. And yet the media coverage, both in the Western media, but also even when journalists are being killed and silenced, by its very nature is going to diminish because they are targeting the truth tellers. They are targeting the eyes and ears on the ground. And of course, it's going to have the impact that Israel is intending to have, which is to silence the coverage and to be able to continue committing these crimes in the dark.
Of course, this is not the first time that Israel has assaulted the Gaza Strip. But what is different and what has been different since 2021 is that there is more of a direct line from journalists and also civilians within the Strip to the global public, through social media. How has that, do you think, changed the conversation on Palestine? How has that challenged the way that legacy media has traditionally covered Palestine? And what did your colleagues in Gaza make of this shift?
I think in general, people in Gaza feel empowered to be able to bring their voices, their perspectives, their incredible and courageous reporting directly to people through social media. It's not to say that that's the easiest process, because we know that people are being shadow banned on social media, they're being censored, their accounts are being hidden. So that comes with its own challenges. But I think it's been a huge shift in terms of being able to reach audiences directly, and also to challenge some of the entrenched narratives, the biases that we see that are systematic in legacy media. I think what's been incredibly frustrating and depressing for our friends and colleagues in Gaza is that it doesn't seem to have made a huge shift in terms of policy. I don't think anybody in Gaza would have imagined that the genocide would go on for this long, and that even with all of their best efforts in showing people the brutality of the genocide, and let's be clear, every single day they document some of the most brutal, unspeakable horrors that anybody can imagine. I mean, some of the images that we see from there, beheaded people, people shot in the head, people, the bodies of babies absolutely shredded, people turning into skin and bones. These are undeniable. No propaganda campaign can deny these images, even though they try. Something else I've noticed is that audiences, especially younger audiences, are turning away from legacy media because they're saying, if you can't get this story right, you're telling us in your daily reports, whether it's the reports that regurgitate Israeli propaganda, minimize Palestinian suffering, or completely erase the story of Palestinians, how can we believe you on other stories? They see that what legacy media is trying to say is, don't believe your eyes and ears. Don't believe the images and the testimony that you're getting directly from the ground in Gaza. Believe us and believe our narrative and our spin. And I think what that's doing is it's completely undermining audience trust in legacy media as a whole. You're seeing actually these legacy media institutions hemorrhaging audiences left and right, especially young people. They are themselves facing an existential crisis of credibility, of legitimacy, and even of audience retention. So this is going to have a major impact on their credibility long term.
Absolutely. And I mean, I want to end by asking, what do you hope the legacy of your fallen colleagues in Gaza will be going forward? And what can journalists around the world learn from them?
Well, I think we need to listen to the voices of the journalists who remain alive, who are telling us, please don't just talk about us when we've been murdered. Please talk about us right now when we're still alive. No more journalists should be killed and targeted in Gaza. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. The world has to demand that Israel stop targeting journalists, that they stop targeting children, that they stop their killing campaign in Gaza. How much more Palestinian blood has to be shed before Israel is stopped? Enough is enough. And I think there has been a profound betrayal of the media industry, of their own colleagues in Gaza. That has to end now. They must speak up for the protection of journalists, and they must cover this story in a way that they would cover other stories, seeing the humanity of the people who are being targeted and valuing their life. Because what this has done is expose the biases that are so entrenched in our media, but also the censorship and the pressure that journalists face on this issue.
That was Al Jazeera executive producer Layla Al-Arian speaking to me earlier today. Now, Israel has a long history of targeting Palestinian journalists, although this has escalated significantly since the most recent war on Gaza began. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 186 of the 206 journalists killed by Israel since 2001 took place in the past 2 years. Now, unfortunately, as we have come to expect, the response of Western journalists to the killing of their colleagues in Gaza has been disappointing, to say the least. Here's a clip from the BBC.
The accusation from Israel is that Anas al-Sharif had a dual role. He was both, in their words, journalist and terrorist. Have you seen, Yolanda, has the BBC seen it or heard any credible evidence that he was participating in the hostilities or acting beyond his role as a journalist?
So the Israeli military basically refers to a trove of documents it says it's uncovered during its operations in the Gaza Strip. They refer to documents where he is supposed to be on the payroll of Hamas, basically. There are a few snapshots of spreadsheets that were put out for journalists to look at, but we're not in any way able to verify them. They show his name on a list where it's supposed to be a phone directory for Hamas operatives in the Jabalia area. Another one where he's on a list of people who were injured as operatives in the year 2023. The BBC understands that prior to the war, Anas al-Sharif was working in the Hamas media office, but that is all that we know about him.
Actually, before I go to the next clip, there's something really, really haunting about seeing that journalist like regurgitating those talking points, the talking points that led to the murder of Anas al-Sharif, on a side-by-side with him reporting from a place where his people are being genocided. It's a little too much. Here is Sky's contribution.
Israel, via the IDF tonight, has issued another statement saying important clarification on Anas al-Sharif. Prior to the strike, we obtained current intelligence indicating that Sharif was an active Hamas military wing operative at the time of his elimination. In addition, he received a salary from the Hamas terror group and Al Jazeera at the same time. What we've presented publicly is only a small declassified portion of our intelligence on al-Sharif leading up to the strike, information obtained during ground operations in Gaza at two separate locations, suggesting that the media is ignoring that information. Clearly, other journalists also died in this attack, did they not? And Sharif himself had denied it. Al Jazeera deny it too. So, you're left with two sides here, aren't you?
The cool indifference with which journalists in the West have responded to the killing of their colleagues in Gaza has been a disgrace. The consistent decision to preface every report of a murdered Palestinian journalist with Israeli talking points designed to demonize them and legitimize their killing is not part of a journalistic duty towards objectivity. It is an editorial choice steeped in racism that does not believe Palestinians can be credible narrators of their own lives. Journalists in Gaza are speaking truth to a mighty and ruthless power with little support from the global community, and knowing it puts a target on their back. I have often wondered why Western reporters do not see people like Shireen Abu Akleh and Anas al-Sharif as their peers, and perhaps it's because in many ways they are not. Our legacy broadcasters may be beyond help at this point, but you know what? Maybe the kids are okay. This happened as the BBC broadcast live on A-level results day.
So on that note, I just want to say free Palestine and the genocide, and the BBC is complicit.
All right, we're here to talk about A-level results. All right, thank you for your thoughts. We're here to talk about A-level results today. Gaza, a whole different subject.
Amazing. He's like, we're here to talk about A-level results today. And he's like, I don't think we are. I think we're here to talk about you lot and your complicity in this unfolding genocide.